Mr. Rogers had a way of combating racism. I love how he came against racism. A lot of people come at it. They speak against it. They object to it, rightly so, as we ought to. But how he did it was brilliant. See, during the late 60s, despite the Civil Rights Act of 64, America still had these segregation issues. Most notably, it was in regards to swimming pools, where white people didn't want to share a pool with black people. And it all kind of came to a head down in Florida. There was a hotel down in Florida where black people and white people swam together in a hotel swimming pool. That is until the owner of the hotel came out and attempted to put an end to it by pouring acid in the pool, terrifying people. And you can see the image there. Well, Mr. Rogers saw this, and of course he saw it for the despicable act that it is, and he chose to do something about it. Again, he didn't call a press conference to express his outrage to this man. Granted, Mr. Rogers was gaining in popularity there in the late 60s, but I would imagine if this, sweet-talking, mild-mannered children's TV host was to say, hey, media outlets, I'm outraged by that. I'd like to express it. I think the media would have flocked, okay? That's headline news. Mr. Rogers, outraged. But he didn't do that. Again, what he did was brilliant. He took a segment on his show where he exits his home, he goes into the front yard. It's a hot summer's day. He's got a little plastic pool there in the front yard, and he puts his feet in the water to cool them off. And as he's sitting there, Officer Clemmons approaches a black man, and they make some small talk, and Officer Clemmons comments about how refreshing that looked. And so Mr. Rogers invites him to join him. To which Mr. Clemmons, he would decline the invitation initially. He said, I don't have a towel. Or Mr. Rogers said, well, you can use mine. So Officer Clemmons takes off his shoes and socks and puts his dark-colored skin feet in the water right next to the light-colored skin of Mr. Rogers. And the two of them sat there, and I believe they sang a song about love together. And this was all done by design. And afterwards, Mr. Rogers takes his towel and dries the feet of Officer Clemmons. Very reminiscent of what Jesus did with his disciples in the upper room. If you remember in John 13, verse 15, Jesus, he washed the feet of his disciples, and he says there, I have given you an example that you also should do as I have done to you. Again, all orchestrated by Mr. Rogers, all designed. He knew exactly what he was doing. But me as a kid, I had no idea. I'm just watching two guys soaking their feet in a pool on a hot summer's day. Yeah, granted, one had darker skin color than the other. Big deal. I didn't even know what was going on, but so much more. So those images that I might have heard or seen of racism were countered by this right here. And this was his approach. I love it. And here's why this is a demonstration of both patience and kindness. Remember our definitions. Patience is bearing with one another. Mr. Rogers could have gone down to Florida and done violence against that hotel owner. And if you know the character of Mr. Rogers, that is just laughable. It's just, what? No, of course he didn't do that. He could have tried to shut down the hotel, put him out of business. He could have protested out front. He chose none of those. He chose this way. And in his patience, Mr. Rogers showed kindness as well. Remember our definition of kindness. Kindness is being useful, helpful, beneficial to others. Who benefited here? I did. And millions of other kids who saw this, even though we didn't fully comprehend what was going on. It was a positive example that is in now our memory bank because he chose to do this. Who else benefited? Officer Clemmons. He actually wrote a book, and on the cover of the book is this picture that I showed you on the screen. And he says, this is his last name really is Clemmons. So Mr. Clemmons said this. He said, the icon, Fred Rogers, not only was showing my brown skin in the tub with his white skin, but as I was getting out of that tub, he was helping me dry my feet. And so that scene touched me in a way that I was not prepared. Mr. Rogers' subtle act of kindness made such a huge impact. And that story is being told some 50 years later, and we can learn from it. But again, ultimately, our standard, our goal, the perfect example of kindness, Jesus Christ. Where do we get our power? The Holy Spirit, who empowers us to imitate God and do likewise, as Mr. Rogers has done. That's Christ-likeness in crisis.